The knock came from inside the wall. Not a creak, not the house, settling a knock. 3 deliberate strikes from behind the plaster of a bedroom that had been locked for 6 months. The couple standing in my office told me this in the same flat tone people use when they have stopped expecting to be believed. The wife folded her hands on her lap. The husband looked at the floor. Neither of them was hysterical. That was the first thing that told me they were telling the truth. The people who have been living with something do not dramatize it. They are tired. I am Father Chad Ripperger. I have spent the better part of 2 decades as one of a small number of priests in this country still trained and authorized to perform the Church's rite of exorcism. I am a Thomistic philosopher by formation. I did not go looking for this ministry. No sane man would. What I can offer is precision, the Church's theological language applied to what actually happens, not what film and television have trained people to expect. The demonic is not theatrical, it is patient. And in the cases I have observed across my ministry, the most persistent activity is often the quietest. What this family was living with has a name in that language. It is called an infestation. And at the center of it was a spirit the scriptures call a familiar spirit. Leviticus 19:31 names them by category and forbids contact. Do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Do not seek them out. The law in Leviticus 20:27 was capital. The severity tells you the category. This is not metaphor. And the danger has not diminished across the centuries. Let me tell you what I found in that house. The husband, a man in his mid-40s, had grown up practicing Catholic. He had drifted in his 20s, as many do not into explicit sin, but into a kind of spiritual vacancy. Sunday Mass attended without preparation, confession, perhaps once a year, prayer that had become a habit without substance, a rosary hanging from a rearview mirror that had not been prayed in years. His wife, a few years younger, had been raised in a household where her grandmother consulted a medium, not a theatrical medium, a woman in a suburb who held small gatherings and who communicated, she said, with the dead. The wife had attended twice as a teenager, curious, not malicious. No one told her the category she had just stepped into. No one in her formation had named what her grandmother was practicing, or explained that the Church has always understood that what attaches itself through such contact is not a deceased grandmother, but something that knows your grandmother's name, your grandmother's mannerisms, your grandmother's most private memories, and uses them. They married, a good marriage by most measures. The house they bought 10 years later had been on the market at a price that struck everyone as too low. The previous owners had left within a year of moving in. For 400 years, the Church provided the laity with specific prayers to address situations in their homes that they could not explain. Most parishes stopped teaching them after 1965. Now, they have all been compiled into a concise, practical guide. Keep it near the door and read the first page tonight. You will find the link to get the book in the description and in the first pinned comment. No one mentioned why. The activity began within the first year of their moving in. It was not what people expect from horror films. It was quieter than that, and in some ways more unsettling precisely because of its quietness. Objects moved, not violently, not with noise, but found in places they had not been left. A crucifix in the hallway, properly hung, found face down 3 times in 1 week. A photograph of the couple's wedding, the only photograph displaying a religious ceremony, removed from the mantel and placed in a closet. The husband found it there and said nothing to his wife for a week, assuming he had put it away himself. He had not. Their youngest child, the girl of 8, began sleeping with the light on. When they asked her why, she said something was watching her from the corner of the room. Children are not subtle about this. They do not yet know they are not supposed to say it. She said it matter-of-factly, the way a child describes a cold room or a sound outside the window. The wife noticed she could not pray in certain rooms of the house. This is diagnostically significant in ways that are not always immediately obvious. The rosary, the examination of conscience before prayer, sincere address to God, these are not spiritually neutral instruments. The demonic cannot tolerate what points toward the real presence of God, and a demonic infestation in a place will generate in the soul a restlessness, a heaviness, a weight that makes prayer feel impossible in certain rooms of the house. The person often attributes this to distraction, to fatigue, to their own spiritual inadequacy. It is not always that. She had stopped attempting the rosary in the bedroom. The knocking had been coming from that same room's interior wall for 3 months. Now, I will be precise about the theology, because precision is what the church provides, and it is what people in these situations need most. Aquinas treats the nature of the fallen angels across questions 50 through 64 of the first part of the Summa Theologiae. What he establishes, and what the church has always held, is that the fallen angels retain their full angelic intelligence. They are not diminished in their natural powers by the fall. What they lost is sanctifying grace and the beatific vision. What they retain is an intelligence that operates without the limitations of a material brain, that sees patterns across time, that can observe a family across generations, that can track what was offered to it and by whom, that has what can only be described as a comprehensive record of the people to whom it has attached itself. That is what a familiar spirit is. A fallen angel that has, through some door, the human side opened, established a particular association with a person or a bloodline or a place. The association is legal in the theological sense. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote more than a dozen questions on how fallen angels operate. Most Catholics have never read one line of it. This archive gathers that teaching, the 1,614 rite, and 4 centuries of documented cases into a single reference. Read it slowly, 1 chapter a night. You will find the link to get the book in the description and in the first posted comment. The demon has a claim, a foothold, because something was handed to it. In this case, there were 2 doors. The first was the grandmother's mediumship, the deliberate invitation of what presented as a communicating spirit of the dead. The second was an object the wife had inherited, a small wooden figurine the grandmother had kept on her consultation table, which the wife had taken after the grandmother died out of sentiment, with no knowledge of what the figurine had been used for or what had been asked to inhabit it. The familiar spirit does not need to possess anyone to do its work. The classification the Church uses runs from temptation at the lightest end through oppression, obsession, infestation, and subjugation to possession at the most severe. Infestation sits in the middle of that range. The demonic is present in a place and exerts influence on the people living there, but it has not entered the person. It monitors. It presses on the existing weaknesses. It waits. It is opportunistic in a way. Aquinas understood precisely fallen angels cannot directly read the human mind, but they can read behavior with extraordinary accuracy, can observe patterns of sin and spiritual neglect, can detect the weakening of sacramental practice, and calibrate their pressure accordingly. This family's sacramental life had thinned to almost nothing. The husband received communion at Mass without having been to confession in over a year. The wife had never been formally instructed in any parish she had attended about the gravity of the occult contact in her past. The home had no blessed objects of any kind, no holy water, no image of Our Lady at the threshold, no blessed crucifix on the bedroom wall, no rosary prayed together in the evening. The house was, spiritually speaking, an unguarded field. And an unguarded field does not remain empty. Matthew 12 tells us exactly what happens to the house. Found swept clean but unoccupied, it is filled, and what fills it is worse than what left. St. John Vianney, the Curé d'Ars, who died on 4 August 1859, referred to what attacked him in the night as Le Grappin the Grappler. He lived with this for decades. He did not pretend otherwise. He also did not cease his ministry, did not cease his hours in the confessional, did not cease his intercession. What he said was consistent with what Aquinas established. The demonic finds purchase where it finds weakness. Where there is genuine holiness, it attacks from outside. Where there is vacancy, it presses closer. Padre Pio's stigmata appeared on 20 September 1918. He spoke openly of physical attacks by fallen spirits across his priestly life, not as curiosities to be marveled at, but as the ordinary cost of serious priestly warfare. Dr. Richard Gallagher, a board-certified psychiatrist at Columbia and New York Medical College, has documented in peer-reviewed psychiatric literature cases he evaluated as genuine diabolic activity after exhausting every neurological and psychological explanation the field could offer. The church does not ask you to accept the reality of the demonic on credulous faith alone. The evidence is extensive. What is absent in most Catholic formation today is not evidence. It is the theological framework to read what the evidence is actually showing. Now I will tell you what we found when we walked through that house and what was done. I bring holy water always, the Leonine blessing, the older form, with properly exorcised salt mixed in. I bring a stole. I bring the Roman ritual of 1,614, not the 1,999 revision, which placed permission requirements that have made formal exorcism practically inaccessible in most dioceses, and stripped from the rite much of the specific adjurative language. The older form had retained precisely because it was effective across centuries. I entered the home as a priest operating within the church's authority, not as a paranormal investigator. The distinction matters for what happens. The bedroom where the knocking had been reported was noticeably colder than the rest of the house. The cold was localized, not diffuse, not drafty, but concentrated in the corner the child had identified months earlier. Always the same corner. I treat thermal anomalies as one data point among several, not as performance. Combined with the child's consistent report, the location of the face-down crucifixes, and the wife's inability to pray in that room, it formed a coherent pattern. Behind the baseboard in that corner, we found, placed deliberately, a small packet, wrapped cloth, bound. Inside it, the wooden figurine, which the family had believed was stored in an attic box, a piece of paper with names written in a script neither husband nor wife recognized, and a quantity of soil. Someone, at some point, whether a previous occupant or someone acting with the previous occupant's knowledge, had placed that bundle inside the wall of the house. This is a documented mechanism of infestation, an object consecrated to a purpose, placed in a structure to anchor a presence to the space. The familiar spirit had been installed deliberately, and the family that moved in afterward brought with them the connection the grandmother's mediumship had already established. That is the picture. The monitoring was real. The presence had a legal claim through the inherited contact on one side, through the anchoring object on the other. And it had been observing this family with the patience only a being without a biological nervous system can sustain learning their vulnerabilities, pressing on the weakest points, waiting for any further opening it might exploit. Let me be direct with you, as I am always direct with the people who come to me. I am offering you a composite account drawn from a pattern I have observed in dozens of situations across my ministry. The details vary, the specific object differs, the initial point of contact differs, but the structure is consistent. A door opened through occult contact. A presence attached through an object or an invitation. An infestation that grows quietly in proportion to the thinning of sacramental life. And a resolution that is fully available through the church's ordinary means. That last part is what I want you to hear most clearly. Here is what was done and what must be done. The wife made a full sacramental confession. This is not a recommendation among several options. It is the first and non-negotiable step. The sacrament of penance is, in the theological tradition of the church and the demonological literature consistent with it, the breaking of the legal hold. John 20:23. Whose sins you forgive are forgiven. The absolution removes what the demonic has used as its grounds for claim. I have observed this change the atmosphere of a room before I have uttered another prayer. The husband confessed within the same week. Their eldest child, old enough to receive the sacrament, went to confession with a sound priest the following Saturday. The occult object, the figurine, was removed from the wall and burned. This is not folk custom. The Roman ritual addresses objects of this kind. Objects used in occult practice or placed as instruments of a diabolic attachment do not carry their function neutrally. They hold what was put into them. They are not curiosities to examine, not items to donate or store elsewhere. The church's consistent instruction is removal and destruction. We burned it. I perform the blessing and minor exorcism of the home according to the older form of the Roman ritual. This is distinct from the major rite of exorcism over a person and does not require extraordinary episcopal permission. Every priest can perform a home blessing. Every priest should know how to do it well. I move through each room with the exorcised holy water, praying the church's prayers at each threshold and in each corner, spending particular time in the bedroom and in the room where the child slept. A blessed crucifix was installed above the front entrance. An image of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception was placed in the hallway. At each external threshold, front door, back door, the entrance to the garage, a St. Benedict medal, blessed by a priest using the full exorcistic blessing of the medal, was affixed to the frame. The St. Benedict medal is a sacramental. Its efficacy comes from the prayer of the Church, not from the physical properties of the medal itself. The letters on the reverse, CSSML, NDSMD, Crux Sacra sit mihi lux, Non Draco sit mihi dux, the Holy Cross be my light, let not the dragon be my guide, are not decorative. They are a declaration of allegiance to Christ, and that declaration, made through a church-blessed object, carries the weight of the Church's authority behind it. The knocking stopped the night of the blessing. The cold in the corner returned to room temperature by the following morning. The child slept without the light on within the week. She told her mother that the corner was empty now. She said it the same way she had said it was occupied matter-of-factly, without drama. Children notice when something leaves. The familiar spirit had no authority in that home that had not been granted to it. When the doors were closed, through the sacraments, through the destruction of the object, through the blessing of the home and the restoration of prayer and the Eucharist received worthily, there was nothing left for it to hold to. Isaiah 54:17, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. That is a covenant promise, not an unconditional guarantee. It is conditioned on remaining within the covenant. The protection is real, but it is not self-maintaining. You have to live it. Why is this happening to so many families now? The answer is not complicated. The infrastructure of protection has been systematically dismantled, and the dismantling has been internal as much as external. A 2019 Pew Research survey found that only 1/3 of self-identified Catholics in this country believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. 1/3. The Eucharist is the central reality of Catholic life, the thing the demonic cannot approach without recoiling, the source from which sacramental protection radiates. If it is a symbol, then receiving it worthily is not a category that makes sense. And if receiving worthily is not a category, then sacramental confession before reception is not a category either. And when confession becomes a formality, the mechanism that breaks the demonic's legal hold atrophies into uselessness. The Second Vatican Council closed in 1965. What followed in many dioceses and seminaries was a catechetical formation that treated the demonic as metaphor, as Jungian shadow, as the poetic externalization of internal psychological conflicts. Priests were trained in therapeutic models and made suspicious of anything that sounded like the Church's older language. The 1999 revision of the rite of exorcism, well-intentioned in some respects, placed episcopal permission requirements that have made qualified exorcists practically inaccessible in most of the country. Dioceses that lack a trained exorcist do not, as a rule, urgently seek to remedy that gap. California's no-fault divorce law of 1969 spread to every state in the Union within 2 decades. The family, which the Church has always understood as the primary school of prayer, the fundamental cell of formation, the basic domestic unit of resistance to spiritual disorder, has been weakened in ways that compound across generations. A household without regular prayer, without sacramentals, without a father who leads devotion and a mother who teaches it, is a household without its walls. The demonic does not require dramatic entry. It requires vacancy, and we have been producing vacancy at industrial scale. I say none of this to produce despair. I say it because I have seen what the restoration looks like, and the restoration is available. Here is what you do this week, not eventually. Go to confession. If months or years have passed, that is precisely the reason to go now, not later. Find a priest who hears confession seriously, who gives real absolution, who takes the seal absolutely, who instructs and corrects as a father rather than simply validating. Confession is your first line of defense, not a devotional supplement. Receive the Eucharist worthily, in a state of grace, having confessed serious sin, believing in what you are receiving. Do not approach the Eucharist as habit. Approach it as the greatest act of the week, because it is. Bless your home. Ask your pastor. If your pastor is unavailable or uninformed about the older blessing rite, find a traditionally formed priest and ask him. Get a saint. Benedict medal, properly blessed with the full exorcistic blessing, and place it at every external threshold. Hang a blessed crucifix in every room where your family sleeps and in the room where you gather. Place an image of Our Lady at your entrance. These are not aesthetic choices. They are acts of occupation. You are marking this space as claimed by Christ. Remove from your home anything that entered through occult contact. Ouija boards, regardless of how casually they were used or how long ago. Objects given by people who practice fortune-telling, mediumship, or any form of occult work. Anything used in a seance, a spirit board session, any ritual not of the church. The object is the anchor. Remove the anchor, and you remove the claim. Consecrate your family to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Pray the Rosary daily, not as a nostalgic gesture, but as the specific weapon that Our Lady herself at Fatima in 1917 identified as essential. Seek a sound spiritual director, a priest formed in the Church's tradition, and submit your interior life to his guidance. Do not navigate this alone. The isolation of the modern Catholic, cut off from community, from regular sacramental access, from a confessor who knows him, is itself a vulnerability. Build community. Form your children before the world forms them in something else entirely. Understand this, which I want to be the last thing I say before the close. Hope is not optimism. Optimism is a disposition of temperament. Hope is a theological virtue. It is grounded not in circumstances, but in the character of God and what he has demonstrated across the centuries of the Church's life. The Church survived the Arian crisis of the 4th century, when the majority of the hierarchy had accommodated the heresy. Saint Athanasius stood contra mundum against the world exiled 5 times, holding what the Council of Nicaea had defined against the pressure of emperors and bishops. He was right. The world was wrong. The faith endured. The Church survived the systematic de-Christianization of the French Revolution, which attempted to erase centuries of Catholic civilization from the soil of France within a decade. It survived communist persecution across Eastern Europe, which murdered priests, shuttered seminaries, and forced the sacraments underground for generations, and emerged in those countries with a faith more vigorous than in many Western countries that had been left undisturbed. In each case, the survival came not through institutional maneuvering or public strategy, but through saints, through people who maintained the sacramental life in its integrity when everything around them was dissolving. That is the pattern. And we are in such a moment again. The familiar spirit that monitored that family's home for years was not an isolated curiosity, it was a symptom. A symptom of the vacancy that results when the protection is abandoned, when the sacraments are received without faith, when the family no longer prays together, when the priest no longer knows what the Roman ritual contains. But the protection has not been destroyed, it has been neglected. And what has been neglected can be restored. God is with us. He has always been with us. The question is whether we will be with him. There is something I intend to address next. What happens when the oppression is not in the home, but in the person? And why the distinction between oppression and obsession matters for how a confessor and a spiritual director must each respond, because the pastoral approach differs, and getting it wrong in either direction causes harm. That is where we will go next.